In this video, we're going to look at the chambers of the heart. This is chapter 20, part 2. So the heart has 4 chambers. The superior chambers are called the atria. So we have a right atrium, approximately right here. And then we have a left atrium. It's going to be right below this auricle, so it's going to be kind of like right here is where that atrium is. And then we also have the inferior chambers, which are the large pumping chambers, which are called ventricles. So you have kind of a large right ventricle here, and then the left ventricle on the other side, kind of right here. Now, the atria on the superior end, they are going to be receiving blood from blood vessels returning blood to the heart, which are called veins, while the ventricles are going to be ejecting blood from the heart into blood vessels called arteries. On the anterior surface of each atrium, we also have this wrinkled little pouch-like structure that's called an auricle. So on the left atrium, this auricle kind of covers, you can see it right here, it kind of covers that atrium, or our view of the left atrium there. And the auricle on the right atrium is going to be right there. Each of these auricles is going to increase the capacity of the atrium just slightly so that it can hold a greater volume of blood. Now, also on the surface of the heart, we have these grooves that are called sulci. Plural is sulci, singular is sulcus. So we're going to have a sulcus, a coronary sulcus here on this side. It's going to be kind of along here. And then the interventricular sulcus is going to be approximately here. And these sulci contain coronary blood vessels, and they are usually covered by fat as well. Now, one really important thing to note is that blood vessels bringing blood towards the heart are always going to be called veins, and this is regardless of whether they carry oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. And blood vessels that are carrying blood away from the heart are always going to be called arteries, regardless of whether they are oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. And this is important when we start talking about the pulmonary circulation system, because this is where we're going to have arteries that are bringing deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs to be oxygenated. And then once that blood has oxygen in it from the lungs, they're going to bring that blood back to the heart, which is now full of oxygen, but they're going to come to the heart in veins. So we have the right atrium on this side because we're looking at the posterior view of the heart here. So the right atrium is going to be over here, and it receives blood from 3 veins. So it's going to receive blood from the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinuses. And that's labeled right here. So we're going to get blood coming into the right atrium from this blood vessel, and this blood vessel here. So blood passes from the right atrium, which is going to be right here, into the right ventricle, right here, through a valve that's called the tricuspid valve. So that valve is going to be right here, this tricuspid valve here, and it's called tricuspid because it's made up of 3 cusps, or kind of 3 leaflets that make this valve. Now this valve is also called the right atrioventricular valve. And this pretty much tells you directly where it goes between. So it goes between the atria and the ventricles. And now the valves of the heart are composed of very dense connective tissue that's covered by endocardium. Now inside the ventricles, we do have these series of ridges that are formed by raised bundles of cardiac muscle fibers. And these raised bundles are called trabeculae carneae. And you can see that they're labeled here in the left ventricle. You can see these here, but they're also found here in the right ventricle as well. Some of these trabeculae carneae actually help to convey part of the conduction system of the heart. So they help that electricity to move through the heart in a heartbeat. So now looking back at that tricuspid valve between the right atrium and the right ventricle, the cusps are actually connected to these tendon-like cords that are called chordae tendineae. So these right here, these chordae tendineae. And again, it's just labeled here in the left ventricle, but we're going to see the same on both sides. So these chordae tendineae are then in turn connected to these cone-shaped trabeculae carneae, or these kind of extensions of the trabeculae carneae that are specifically called papillary muscles. So these papillary muscles here, and you can kind of see them right here as well. And again, that they're just labeled here on the left side. And we're going to look more in detail of these valves and the role of the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles with regards to those valves. Now, internally, the right ventricle is separated from the left ventricle by this little, well, not so little, but by a partition that's called the interventricular septum. So this large partition right here separating the left ventricle from the right ventricle. Now from the right ventricle, blood is going to pass right through this pulmonary valve, which is right up here. And it's going to go into a larger artery, which is called the pulmonary trunk, labeled right here. This is the pulmonary trunk up here. And then it's going to divide into left and right pulmonary arteries. So you can kind of see actually the right pulmonary artery is labeled right here. And then the left pulmonary artery is labeled here. And these are going to be the arteries that actually carry the blood to the lungs. So this is deoxygenated blood going to the lungs. Remember that these vessels are taking blood away from the heart. So they're going to be called arteries, even though they are carrying deoxygenated blood. So here we can see a real preserved heart, and we can kind of see the different parts that we've already talked about, the right atrium and the right ventricle here. We can also kind of see the papillary muscles and the chordae tendineae as well. So we can see here the right atrium up here and the ventricle in this area. And then here we can see that papillary muscle down there and those chordae tendineae that are going to be connecting the papillary muscle to that tricuspid valve. And then the blood is going to come through here and then up through the pulmonary trunk to the left and right pulmonary arteries. All right, so we're going to move on to the left side of the heart. So this left atrium here pretty much is the same thickness as the right atrium, and it forms most of the base of the heart. Now it receives blood from the lungs through 4 pulmonary veins. Now just like the right atrium, inside the left atrium is a pretty smooth wall. Now blood is going to pass from the left atrium into the left ventricle by the bicuspid valve. So this bicuspid valve is right here. And just like the tricuspid valve, which has 3 cusps, the bicuspid valve has 2 cusps. And this valve, just like the other one, this one's called the left atrioventricular valve. You can also see on this picture, it's quite evident the differences in thickness between the left and right ventricles. So here we have kind of the thickness of the right ventricle there. And then if we look at the left ventricle, it's quite a bit thicker. You can see that. And we're going to actually look at why we have these differences in thickness between the 2 ventricles. Now the left ventricle is the thickest chamber of the heart, and it forms the apex of the heart. Now just like the right ventricle, the left ventricle contains trabeculae carinae and also has the chordae tendineae that anchor the cusps of the bicuspid valve to the papillary muscles. Now blood is going to pass from the left ventricle through the aortic valve into the ascending aorta. And then some of the blood that in the aorta is going to also go into the coronary arteries, and these are going to carry blood to supply the heart wall with blood, with nutrients, and to remove waste from the cells of the heart as well. Now, most of the blood is going to pass into the arch of the aorta and into the descending aorta, and going to carry blood throughout the entire body. So the left ventricle has to be really thick because it has to have enough pumping power to pump blood to the entire rest of the body. So that's going to be the end of chapter 20, part 2.